When a royal guardsman becomes the target of a reckless driver, it seemed justice would stay behind the scenes. But the way this incident shook the nation, revealed secrets, and brought the culprit to an unforeseen end will leave you breathless. What was hidden behind the wheel? And how did the guardsman defy all odds to become a symbol of unbroken honor? Discover the truth that shocked everyone.
Be sure to subscribe to the channel and let's promote respect for the Royal Guard together. Let the whole world see how many of us there are.
The morning sun reflected off the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, transforming the square into a shimmering canvas. Tourists from all over the world flocked to the iconic site, eager to witness the majestic changing of the guard ceremony. Cameras clicked non-stop, smiles lit up faces, and the soft hum of conversations created a festive atmosphere. Standing at his post near the main entrance was Jonathan Harper. At 26 years old, the tall and poised guardsman was a symbol of royal discipline. His red tunic with its gleaming gold buttons sparkled in the sunlight, and his towering bearskin hat added to his commanding presence. Jonathan stood motionless, despite tourists' attempts to provoke a reaction. They made faces, waved their arms, and took selfies with him in the background, but he remained as still as a marble statue. For Jonathan, this was more than a job. It was an honor to serve the crown and uphold a tradition that had endured for centuries. But beneath this idyllic scene lay an unnoticed tension. Hidden among the bustling crowd was a silver car, moving unusually fast for such a crowded area. Its polished surface gleamed in the sunlight as it approached, causing some tourists to turn and look curiously at the vehicle's odd pace. At first, it seemed like a simple mistake. Perhaps the driver was lost or wanted a closer look at the palace. But when the piercing screech of tires echoed through the square, everyone's hearts skipped a beat. Everything happened in an instant. The silver car suddenly veered off the main road, jumped the curb, and sped directly toward Jonathan's post. The guardsman, standing motionless as protocol demanded, couldn't have predicted such a sudden and shocking event. Gasps erupted from the crowd, followed by panicked screams. The distance between the car and Jonathan shrank far too quickly. "Get out of the way!" someone shouted. But Jonathan didn't move. Not because he didn't hear, but because his duty required him to stand firm to the very end. Impact. The car slammed into Jonathan with such force that his body was flung into the air like a rag doll. His bearskin hat flew off, and his once pristine tunic was now stained with dust and blood. He landed several meters away from the point of impact, motionless and small against the grand backdrop of the palace. The square fell silent. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. No one could believe what had just happened. Then came the wave of chaos. Screams filled the air, and people rushed toward Jonathan, desperate to see if he was still alive. "Someone call an ambulance!" a woman with a phone in hand shouted. "Clear the area! Give him space!" a man barked, attempting to take control of the situation. Meanwhile, the silver car had come to a halt near the barricades. The engine sputtered and died, and a young man stepped out. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock. Raising his hands as if to apologize, he stammered, I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." But his words only fueled the crowd's anger. "What have you done?" someone yelled. "This was a mistake. I wasn't thinking." The driver stammered, his voice trembling. The crowd began to surround the car, a wall of judgment closing in. Some tourists pulled out their cameras, capturing every moment of the unfolding chaos. Jonathan lay motionless on the ground. His chest rose and fell faintly, a sign that he was still breathing. Paramedics had been called, but every second felt like an eternity. Nearby guards at other posts remained in position, adhering to protocol, though their tense expressions betrayed their concern. Why had this happened? The question lingered in the air, Speculation swirled among the crowd. Was it an accident or something deliberate? Tourists who had come to enjoy the solemnity and grandeur of the day now found themselves witnesses to an unthinkable tragedy. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. The ambulance was on its way, but its arrival did little to calm the anxious crowd. People continued to ask the same haunting question: would the Guardsman survive? A day that had begun as a celebration of tradition and stability had turned into a nightmare. But this was only the first chapter in a series of events that would shake everyone to their core. The square in front of Buckingham Palace, moments ago alive with the hum of conversation and camera clicks, erupted into chaos. Screams echoed from every direction, mingling with the screech of tires and the crunch of metal. The silver car responsible for the tragedy now sat tilted against the barricades, lifeless, as though it had surrendered. Inside, the driver, a young man with panicked eyes and a pale face, struggled with the jammed door. "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it!" he muttered frantically. Tugging the handle several times, he realized it was stuck. Wasting no time, he climbed over the passenger seat and exited through the opposite door. His movements were jerky, panicked, as if he could feel the seconds working against him. "It was an accident! I didn't mean to!" he shouted, his eyes darting around the crowd. His voice trembled, his words broken. "The brakes failed. I couldn't stop." But the crowd didn't believe him. Their faces showed anger, disbelief, and judgment. "Liar!" someone yelled. "Did you see how fast he was driving? He didn't even try to brake." Another voice called out from the throng. Meanwhile, on the pavement lay Jonathan. His once immaculate uniform was soaked with blood, the bright red fabric now mixed with dark, muddy stains. His bearskin hat, a proud symbol of his service, lay discarded nearby. Two figures, clearly tourists with medical training, pushed through the onlookers, their faces tense with urgency. A woman with short hair and large glasses dropped to her knees beside Jonathan, pulling a small first aid kit from her bag. Her hands trembled as she tried to maintain composure. "He's got a pulse, but it's weak," she said to the man next to her, who held a phone. "He's got a head injury and probably broken ribs." She gently pressed a cloth against the wound on his temple, trying to staunch the bleeding. "Has anyone called an ambulance?" she demanded, her voice firm despite the tension. "Yes, they're on their way," the man replied. "They said a few minutes." Every second felt like an eternity. Tourists continued filming with their phones, but some began stepping in to help, ushering curious bystanders away from the scene. Meanwhile, a group of royal guards stationed nearby broke protocol and rushed to the site. Their typically stoic faces now showed clear concern. One of them, a senior officer, took charge of the situation. "Everyone, step back! Clear the area!" his commanding voice boomed. "Paramedics need access to the injured." The crowd began to scatter, though many lingered too close, unable to tear their eyes away from Jonathan's motionless form. Finally, the wail of sirens broke through the tense atmosphere. An ambulance sped down the narrow streets, its blue lights flashing urgently. When it screeched to a halt at the gates, two paramedics leapt out, carrying a stretcher and medical equipment. They wasted no time kneeling beside Jonathan to assess his condition. "Stabilize his breathing," one medic ordered, checking his pulse. The tourist woman handed over her makeshift bandages and stepped back to give the professionals room. "Thank you. You did everything you could," the medic told her without looking up. Jonathan was carefully lifted onto the stretcher, every movement deliberate to avoid causing further injury. His face was pale, and his breathing was barely perceptible. As the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance, someone from the crowd shouted, "Will he make it?" The medic didn't respond, but the tight line of his lips and the tension in his expression spoke volumes. The ambulance pulled away, leaving behind a trail of silence and bloodstains on the pavement. The crowd stood in stunned disbelief, trying to process what had just happened. "This is disgraceful," an older man in the crowd muttered. How could something like this be allowed to happen? Guards should be protected. They're a part of royal tradition. A woman near him chimed in. Meanwhile, the driver of the silver car remained frozen in place. His hands trembled as he mumbled to himself, his gaze unfocused. "You ruined his life," a woman from the crowd said coldly as she passed him. The day, which had begun as a routine morning at Buckingham Palace, was now etched in memory as a day when royal tradition clashed with the chaos of the modern world. The hospital corridors buzzed with urgency, resembling a battlefield. People rushed back and forth. Operating room doors swung open and shut with resounding echoes, creating an atmosphere of relentless emergency. On a stretcher, surrounded by medical personnel, lay Jonathan Harper. His face, marred with dark streaks of blood and bruises, was deathly pale. His arms hung limply by his sides, and blood continued seeping from the wound on his temple despite the makeshift bandage applied at the scene. "We're losing him!" one of the medics shouted, staring at the monitors. "We need to stabilize his blood pressure now." The surgical team worked on the edge of their limits. The doctors had already assessed the extent of Jonathan's injuries. Broken ribs, one of which punctured a lung, a severe traumatic brain injury, and multiple internal contusions. The force of the impact had been so devastating that the medical team marveled that he was still breathing at all. "Adrenaline now!" barked the lead surgeon as Jonathan's heart rate began to drop on the monitor. A nurse, her hands trembling, administered the injection. For a few agonizing seconds, the monitor flatlined, but then it showed a faint, stabilizing heartbeat. "He has a chance," the surgeon murmured, though his face remained tense. "But it's up to us now." Outside the operating room. Meanwhile, outside the operating room, a group of Jonathan's fellow guards had gathered. Their crimson tunics stood out starkly against the sterile white walls of the hospital. A senior officer, a stern man in his 40s, was speaking on the phone with someone from higher command. "His condition is critical," he reported, his lips pressed into a grim line. "He's in surgery now, but there's no guarantee." One of the younger guards standing nearby shifted nervously from foot to foot, his eyes red as though he'd been fighting back tears. "Sir, how could this happen? On our watch, on our grounds?" he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and despair. The senior officer broke eye contact momentarily before replying. "It's a matter of time," he said firmly. "We will find out who is responsible." At the police station elsewhere in the city, in a dimly lit interrogation room, police were questioning the driver of the silver car. Thomas Kent, a young man in wrinkled jeans and a leather jacket, sat slouched at the table, his hands tightly clasped together. His face betrayed a mix of fear and desperation. "I already told you. It was a mechanical failure," he said, raising his voice. "The brakes failed. I couldn't stop." "Mr. Kent," the investigator said calmly, pulling out surveillance footage from the scene. "We have video evidence showing your car speeding well above the limit. Care to explain that?" Thomas fell silent. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer that wouldn't come. After several seconds, he stammered, "I didn't mean to. It was an accident." The investigator leaned closer, his expression hardening. "An accident?" he said coldly. "You ran over a royal guardsman. He's fighting for his life right now, and you don't seem to be entirely truthful." Thomas clenched his fists, his face growing even paler. I was distracted. There was a text message. I just wanted to glance at it for a second." The words tumbled out of his mouth like bullets, each one worsening his case. The investigator straightened, jotting down notes. "So, you admit to using your phone while driving? And that your distraction caused this tragedy?" he concluded, his tone unyielding. "Thank you, Mr. Kent. That's all we needed to hear." Public reaction, Meanwhile, news of the incident had already spread across social media. Videos recorded by tourists at the scene quickly went viral, sparking a whirlwind of discussions. Comments ranged from outrage to sympathy, with a mix of shock and disbelief. How could this happen? A royal guardsman on duty and something like this occurs. I hope he survives. These men represent our history. That driver is an idiot. Why are people like him even allowed behind the wheel? However, some voices expressed caution. Maybe it really was a mechanical failure. Let's not jump to conclusions. These debates reached even the hospital, where a group of journalists had gathered outside, awaiting updates on Jonathan's condition. Fighting for life. Inside the operating room, the battle for Jonathan's life continued. The surgeons worked tirelessly to stop internal bleeding and stabilize his vitals. Every movement of the scalpel was precise and deliberate, but the risks were immense. Breathing is improving, a nurse announced, monitoring the machines. But he's still critical. The lead surgeon wiped his brow and nodded. We just need a little more time. He's fighting. Jonathan Harper, the guardsman who never faltered at his post, was now locked in the fight of his life. Though unconscious, his struggle had already captured the hearts of a nation. While Jonathan lay in his hospital bed teetering between life and death, an equally intense drama was unfolding outside its walls. The investigation into the incident began immediately. With the public eye fixed firmly on the case, the police knew that any mistake or oversight could ignite widespread outrage. Initial evidence. The investigative team started with the most obvious aspect: the driver's background. Thomas Kent, a young man with an unremarkable appearance but erratic behavior, quickly stood out. The first troubling discovery came from the police database. Thomas had a prior record of aggressive driving. His license had narrowly avoided suspension for speeding violations just a year earlier. As detectives dug deeper, another crucial detail emerged. Just a month prior, Thomas's car had undergone a technical inspection, and the report showed no issues with the brakes or any other part of the vehicle. This cast immediate doubt on Kent's claim of brake failure. If the brakes were recently inspected, how could they have failed? One investigator mused, flipping through the documents. Something doesn't add up here. Eyewitness testimonies. Statements from witnesses painted an even clearer picture. Several people who had been at the square during the incident reported seeing Kent's silver car before the collision. He was driving way too fast, said an elderly man in a gray coat. I even thought he was in a hurry to get somewhere, but then he swerved straight toward the barricade. It was bizarre. Are you sure he didn't try to brake? The detective asked. Absolutely, the man replied firmly. The car didn't slow down at all. Other witnesses corroborated this account, with some suggesting that Thomas seemed to have deliberately sped up before making the sharp turn. It looked like he was trying to make a scene, to draw attention, said a young woman, nervously clutching the strap of her bag. I don't know. It seemed intentional, like some kind of stunt. Key evidence: security camera footage. A breakthrough came when investigators reviewed footage from the security cameras installed around Buckingham Palace. The video captured the entire sequence of events in stunning detail. Thomas's car approached the square at a visibly excessive speed, executing a maneuver that seemed far from accidental. The footage showed the car approaching the square, and moments before the collision, Thomas sharply turned the steering wheel, directing the vehicle straight toward the barricade and the guard. But the most damning evidence came just seconds before impact. His car accelerated. The video prompted heated discussions among the investigators. This looks deliberate, one detective said, pausing the footage at the critical moment. He had to have seen where he was going. That turn, it doesn't look like he lost control. The lead investigator frowned, studying the recording. If that's the case, this isn't just negligence. This is a criminal act. Interrogating Thomas. Armed with the new evidence, the police brought Thomas Kent in for a second round of questioning. He appeared more subdued, his earlier defensiveness eroding under the weight of the mounting evidence. "Mr. Kent," the detective began, laying out photos and stills from the footage on the table before him. "Here's what we see. You didn't crash into the barricade because you lost control. You turned the wheel yourself. And on top of that, your car sped up." That's a mistake," Thomas stammered, his voice trembling. "I don't know what happened. Maybe the gas pedal got stuck." The detective raised an eyebrow. "The gas pedal got stuck? Are you sure?" "Yes, maybe," Thomas replied haltingly, avoiding eye contact. The detective leaned in, his tone sharper. "Earlier, you said it was the brakes. Now it's the gas pedal? You're already changing your story, Mr. Kent." He slid another photo across the table. "You know what else? We inspected your car. No mechanical failures. Everything checked out." Thomas fell silent. Beads of sweat formed on his brow as his breathing grew faster. The detective allowed the silence to stretch, watching as Thomas's nerves began to fray. "We also have footage," the detective continued, pushing the stills closer to him. "It clearly shows you deliberately steering toward the guard. Why?" "I didn't," Thomas faltered before quietly adding, "It was an accident." But his voice lacked conviction. Public reaction. Meanwhile, news of the investigation spread like wildfire across the country. Social media buzzed with debates and speculation. Videos from the scene, captured by tourists, went viral within hours. Comments flooded in, expressing a mix of outrage, sympathy, and disbelief. How could this happen? A royal guard on duty, and something like this occurs. I hope he survives. These guards are the embodiment of our history. That driver is an idiot. People like him shouldn't be allowed behind the wheel. Still, some voices offered a more cautious perspective. What if it really was an accident? Let's wait for all the evidence before passing judgment. The case became a flashpoint for broader conversations about accountability, respect for tradition, and the need for stricter safety measures around national landmarks. Closing in. As the investigation progressed, one thing became increasingly clear. Thomas Kent's version of events didn't hold up. The evidence suggested intent, and the public demanded justice for Jonathan Harper, a guard who now fought for his life, unwittingly becoming a symbol of resilience and dedication to duty. The question of whether the act was deliberate or a tragic accident lingered, but one truth remained undeniable. The outcome of this investigation would reverberate far beyond the hospital walls. A few days had passed since the accident. The hospital room where Jonathan Harper, the guardsman embodying royal resilience, lay became a battleground for survival. Doctors worked tirelessly to stabilize his condition. Then, during one quiet morning, a miracle occurred. Jonathan woke up from his coma. First words. As Jonathan opened his eyes, pain surged through every part of his body. The light in the room felt too bright, and the sounds around him were muffled, as though reaching him through water. Yet, despite it all, his mind immediately returned to what mattered most. On duty. How's the guard?" he whispered with great difficulty. His words stunned everyone in the room. A nurse standing nearby couldn't hold back her tears. His resilience and dedication to duty earned the admiration of even the most seasoned medical staff. "Everything's fine, Mr. Harper," the nurse said softly, trying to calm him. "You're safe now. The guard is carrying on as always. Support from his colleagues. News of Jonathan's awakening quickly spread among his fellow guardsmen. That same day, several guards in their iconic red uniforms visited the hospital. They approached his room, maintaining their discipline. The senior officer was the first to step inside, his face a mix of pride and relief. "Harper, you've done more than anyone could have expected," he said, standing beside Jonathan's bed. His voice was firm yet filled with warmth. "We're all proud of you." Despite his weakness, Jonathan managed a faint smile. "I was just doing my job, sir," he replied softly. His colleagues handed him letters of support from other guards and even some members of the royal family. In that moment, Jonathan realized his sacrifice had not been in vain. The struggles of recovery. The road to full recovery was long and grueling. Jonathan had to learn to walk again. His leg, severely injured in the accident, was encased in a heavy cast. Physical therapy sessions were excruciating, but Jonathan refused to give up. "You're stronger than the pain," his physical therapist would tell him as he gritted his teeth and tried to take his first steps. "I have to get back on duty," he replied firmly, his face etched with determination. Each day, even the smallest progress became an inspiration for those following his story. Investigation unfolds. While Jonathan fought to recover, investigators worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind the accident. A key witness, who had been standing closest to the scene, finally came forward to share what they knew. "A minute before he hit the guardsman, I heard that man shouting, 'I'll show these guards how helpless they really are,'" the witness told police. This revelation was shocking. What had previously been considered an accident now appeared to be deliberate. Thomas Kent, the driver, was summoned for further questioning. Faced with this new evidence, his story began to unravel. Public reaction. Meanwhile, the public continued to fervently discuss the incident. Jonathan's story had become a symbol of resilience and dedication. On social media, people hailed him as a hero. "His spirit is unbelievable. Even on the brink of death, he was thinking of the guard." What an incredible story. This man deserves an award for his service. The new details about Thomas Kent's actions, however, sparked widespread outrage. "He said that? So it was intentional? This wasn't just an accident. It was a crime. People like him must face justice. I hope he gets what he deserves." A moment that touched everyone. One evening, while Jonathan was still in his hospital bed, he was visited by his parents. His mother, holding his hand tightly, couldn't stop her tears. "You've always been so strong," she said, trying to smile through her sobs. "And even now you're showing everyone what it means to be a true man." "I'm just doing what I'm supposed to, Mom," he replied, struggling to sit up against the pillows. These words became a testament not only to his character, but to the spirit of what it means to be a royal guardsman. His recovery continued to inspire thousands, while the investigation moved closer to its conclusion. The trial of Thomas Kent became a nationwide spectacle, drawing the attention of the entire country. Public outrage, which had been building throughout the investigation, reached its peak. The courtroom was packed with journalists, witnesses, and ordinary citizens eager to witness the conclusion of this shocking story. The start of the trial. Thomas sat on the defendant's bench, looking tense and worn out. His lawyer attempted to portray the incident as an unfortunate accident, pleading with the court to consider the emotional state of the defendant at the time of the incident. "My client did not intend to cause harm," the defense attorney argued passionately. This was a tragic mistake. He deeply regrets his actions. But the prosecutor swiftly dismantled this narrative. Large screens in the courtroom displayed footage from surveillance cameras. The video clearly showed Thomas's car accelerating and then making a sharp turn directly toward the guard. "Your Honor," the prosecutor began, pointing at the screen, "there is no room for doubt here. This was not a mistake. It was a deliberate act." Witness testimonies. Witnesses played a pivotal role in the trial. An elderly man took the stand and recounted, "I heard him shout something mocking right before he drove into the barricade. This wasn't accidental." Other witnesses corroborated his account. A young woman added, "He was clearly trying to humiliate the guards. You could see it in the way he acted." These statements sparked murmurs throughout the courtroom. The judge had to strike his gavel several times to restore order. Technical evidence. The final blow to Kent's defense came from the technical experts. A specialist confirmed that the car's brakes were fully operational and no mechanical issues had been detected. The vehicle was in proper working condition. The expert testified confidently. This confirms that the driver had full control of it at the time of the incident. With this evidence presented, the judge called for a brief pause, allowing both sides to prepare their closing arguments. The verdict. Thomas attempted to appeal to the court's sympathy during his final statement. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I never meant to hurt anyone. It was a mistake. I just lost control." But his words failed to convince the court. The judge, a stern man with a resolute gaze, delivered the verdict. "Considering the evidence presented and the witness testimonies, I cannot accept that this was an accident. Your actions were deliberate. You knowingly endangered the life of a man who serves the Queen and this country." After a pause, filled with palpable tension, the judge announced the sentence. Thomas Kent is sentenced to 5 years in prison. The courtroom erupted into loud applause. Those who had followed the trial felt a sense of closure, knowing justice had been served. Public reaction. Outside the courthouse, the crowd erupted in cheers. Reporters gathered opinions, capturing the atmosphere of vindication. Social media was flooded with comments. "He deserved it!" "Justice at last!" However, not everyone agreed with the sentence. Some argued it was excessive. 5 years is too harsh. People commit worse crimes and get off with less. Still, the majority believed that Thomas had received the punishment he deserved. Jonathan learns the verdict. Meanwhile, Jonathan, still recovering in the hospital, was informed of the outcome. His colleagues shared the news during a visit to his room. Lying in bed, still weak but smiling, Jonathan responded, "So justice has been served." His mother, sitting beside him, took his hand and said, "You've shown everyone that honor and discipline are what truly matter." A lesson for all this story became more than just an account of Jonathan's resilience and bravery. It served as a reminder that respecting those who uphold traditions and order is not just a formality. It is the foundation of a society where justice and law prevail over arrogance and disrespect.